Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. After his previous tariffs were struck down by the US Supreme Court, US President Donald Trump doubled down on his approach to world trade, slapping a global 15% tariff on all of America's trade partners. The European Union reacted with a mix of confusion and outrage, given how little is known about the new tariffs and how they would apply. So is the so-called Turnberry Agreement no longer applicable? Will the US and Europe need to re-engage in negotiations over bilateral trade? Joining us now to discuss this is Tomasz Kasprowicz, Editor-in-Chief at Res Publica Nowa. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning.
So let's begin with the basics. What was the legal basis for the previous tariffs, and why did the Supreme Court essentially deem that the US President abused this piece of legislation and should not have introduced tariffs in the first place, at least not based on that particular act?
Well, these tariffs were set up according to emergency laws given to the president. Since there was no real emergency going on, clearly this act of law was abused, and this was a basis for the lawsuit against this law. So this is not really that complicated. Trump considered having a trade deficit an emergency, while United States had a trade deficit, constant trade deficit, at least since 70s. So that would be one very long-lasting emergency, and the judges clearly seen that and put a stop to this abuse of power.
So now the US administration is apparently determined to more or less maintain its tariffs, but to do so under a different legal basis. First, let's talk about the newly announced tariffs. First 10%, then a hike to 15%. What is the legal basis for this decision?
Well, this is yet another obscure piece of legislation that Trump is using. And this one allows actually the government for temporary tariffs up to 15%. Hence, the number that we are listening to, the first 10 and then 15%, is not coming out of a long calculation made by Trump. It's the cap that is basically set by this law. The problem for Trump is that those tariffs can last up to 5 months. And then they need to be confirmed by Congress, which is by far not certain. In 5 months, still the Republicans will have a majority in Congress, but there might be Trump might have a difficult time finding the majority to support his tariffs, especially as his popularity in the United States wanes. And after almost a year of tariffs being in place, there is basically no promised effects of those tariffs. So there is no increase in jobs in manufacturing. Actually, there is a decrease in jobs in manufacturing. And so far, what we've seen, the amount of money collected for the budget, well, probably now will have to be returned. It will probably take a couple of years before that happens, but clearly those tariffs do not work. As the sway of Republican Party by the president is waning, he might find it hard to have those tariffs maintained.
So now, what do we know about this new temporary tariff regime? Because it seems that it has generated a fair deal of confusion among all of America's partners. Now, starting with the European Union, would these new tariffs be imposed in parallel to the existing agreement for also 15% tariffs? Essentially, that was the previous deal reached with the European Union. Would they apply on top of that? Would they apply on products that were supposed to benefit from lower tariffs? Is this essentially what is going on right now and what Europe wants to know? Essentially, the specifics before any further talks are being held?
Well, we need to keep in mind that what we see is not a calculated policy move. It's a fit of rage of Trump after losing the suit. And those tariffs will be, as far as we understand, replacing the existing tariffs, because the existing tariffs are no longer valid according to American law. So putting 10 or 15% of top of on existing tariffs doesn't seem to apply because the existing tariffs are no longer valid. So basically what Trump is doing is not imposing any new tariffs really, but maintaining the old ones. Of course, we can now discuss exemptions and some trade deals that he made at the level of 10% and what will happen there. But this is a further discussion. We need to keep in mind it's an internal power struggle. So far, President Trump went unopposed and could do whatever he wanted. And this challenge coming from the Supreme Court, which is very unexpected since most of the judges are actually Republicans, is a big blow to President Trump. And his reaction is not, as I said, calculated move. It's mostly a fit of rage and trying to reimpose his will and his grip on the trade policy of the United States. So I wouldn't put that much attention to the details, which we do not know, because there is no details yet. And clearly Trump was not prepared for such a ruling. Hence this haphazard information and instability of the rates that were actually to be imposed. So here we need to wait for more details, but I wouldn't think it doesn't seem feasible that those tariffs are on top of existing tariffs. They're replacing the existing tariffs.
In that case, does it mean that the European Union is mostly worried about questions of consistency, questions of stability? They seem to indicate as much in the most recent communiqué, which says, and I quote, "The European Commission requests full clarity on the steps of the United States and the steps intended to be taken following the recent Supreme Court ruling. The current situation is not conducive to delivering fair, balanced and mutually beneficial transatlantic trade and investment." So would the main problem here be that companies operating within this apparently volatile environment do not really know what tariffs are going to apply essentially a few days from now?
Clearly, yes. On the other hand, it's nothing new. Let's not forget that the agreement that US and the European Union had so far was also very, very shaky and unclear. So it's not that we move from the very stable environment to the very unstable environment. It's that we are going from very unstable environment to completely unknown territory. And I agree with EU stance that the rules should be clear, but the EU should learn by now that those rules are not clear and can change with any tweet of Donald Trump at any moment and at any point. That's the world where we live in now, and we have to get used to it as long as Trump is in power, or maybe longer. Still, demanding the clear rules is of course something that we need to do to ensure the fair game plan. Will we receive those results anytime soon? I don't think so. First, the Trump needs to figure out what to do, and then he will try to impose his will on others. But that will take time, especially that Trump has far more troubles than just the tariffs. Basically, any major pillar of his policy is falling apart barely a year after he took office. The deportations turned into disaster in Minneapolis, and his other policies are also not delivering, including this one. But this one was the one finally he could claim that the tariffs are there, and he is able to impose his will. So this was a big, also political strike at the Trump, especially at this moment that his popularity is very, very low.
But if we consider that even the public doesn't seem to be particularly in favor of that, according to a recent poll, 64 of those surveyed, and that was a poll organized by ABC, Washington Post and Ipsos, said they do not consider these tariffs to be beneficial. Now, when we see this sort of opposition, should we automatically assume that this policy was simply introduced at a whim, or did Trump actually want to achieve a rebalancing in trade relations with America's partners? Are there any arguments in favor of that? Because if this policy essentially made no sense whatsoever, it would be difficult to see why the US is pursuing that with quite some determination, as we see, because they're trying to go around this Supreme Court verdict. So what was the main argument in favor of that, which Trump has been advancing? And how far is Trump from achieving the objective that he set out to achieve in this regard?
Well, yes, indeed, Trump believed that what he can do is to bring back manufacturing jobs to America, that he can decrease the trade imbalances. Also, he believed he can use tariffs as a tool to subjugate other countries. And he basically, after a year, we can say that he lost on all accounts. The manufacturing jobs, as I mentioned, dropped over the last year. The trade balance of United States is at a record high today, despite of the tariffs. So basically, with the tariffs, he went with some basic economic theory that was suggesting certain outcomes. Well, in practice, this theory didn't work. Well, it didn't work in many other places. It also suggested the spike in inflation in the United States due to tariffs, which we didn't see. So we learned something new about tariffs. And it shows that they are not working the way they are supposed to, at least for a country like United States. Still, the point of tariffs is a very political one. Yes, the Trump made with the introduction of tariffs, the Liberation Day. Yeah, that's when he said that America was liberated by imposing those tariffs. And I know how outrageous it sounds and how outrageous it is, but this is what he did. And he stands very firmly behind the tariffs. So now, after so many setbacks, saying no, that was a bad move would be basically the end of his presidency right now, and in a huge disgrace. So he needs to double down on the tariffs to try to preserve any of his policies, especially as the other ones are falling apart as well.
So what is going to be, in your opinion, the next step in the talks with the European Union? Do you think that this is simply a matter of clarification, a matter of continuity? Very quickly, because we're slowly running out of time.
Yeah, probably that's what's going to happen, because big disturbances in trade are not something that is welcome. So probably Trump will say that provisionally he is setting the tariffs for European Union as agreed before, just to have the trade going without disruptions. That's the most likely scenario.
Tomasz Kasprowicz was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you very much.
And I'm Jonasz Rewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please do stay with us.